Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable. And the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why we've published our first book from Australia Institute Press. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia, from leading thinkers such as Bob Brown, Sally McManus, Dr. Emma Shortis, and Professor Brian Schmidt. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
The idea that free trade is universally accepted around the world and there is no alternative, so progressives should just get with the program, there is no alternative to free trade, well, that's over. That's done. That's cool.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. Well, the year in politics is starting off with a bang.
For American citizens, January 20th, 2025 is Liberation Day.
It's time to get Australia back on track.
The newly elected coalition government is the last chance to reverse this decline.
This is what a future made in Australia looks like.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
Donald Trump has just been inaugurated as the 47th American president, and a federal election in Australia is just around the corner. Joining me today to talk about what surprises the 2025 political year might bring is Australia Institute Executive Director Richard Dennis. G'day, Richard. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, anytime.
So before we talk about Australia, Donald Trump has just been inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States. What do you think this Trump presidency will mean for Australia?
Oh, gee, it's hard to make forecasts about Donald Trump, isn't it? Look, before I make forecasts about Australia, let me make a forecast about democracy. Who we vote for really matters. Anyone in America or anyone in Australia who doesn't think that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump would have taken the US in a different direction, well, they're clearly just not paying any attention. So while the choice is more extreme in the US than most, I think democracies need that wake-up call, because so many people have been told for so long that because the only job of being Prime Minister or President is managing the economy, because that's the main thing they have to do, and given that most major political parties kind of agree broadly on how to manage the economy, we've been told for decades that democracy's boring. Well, whatever Donald Trump's agenda is, it's not going to be steady as she goes, and it is going to have a big and a lasting impact on the US, as most elections do, but certainly most elections of people who set out to change things. So, yeah, of course votes matter. Of course democracy matters. And if you're worried about what Trump's going to do, change is possible, right? Change is possible, because what's everyone fearing at the moment? That Donald Trump will get in there and change things. But, for a lot of people in Australia and the US, they sort of think, well, the Democrats can't really change anything, or Labor can't really change anything. Well, yeah, they can.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. So what does it mean for Australia? Well, lots of things. I mean, we've signed a 40-year, $360 billion deal with the US over the AUKUS submarines. Now, to be clear, like most people in the world who think about submarines, I don't think that those submarines will ever get delivered under the terms of the original agreement. But I think that Australia joining itself to the hip so expensively and over such a long period of time seems like a much worse decision now than it did 6 months ago, even for its original backers. I think we'll see Trump using that leverage over us. Australia's desperate to have these submarines. What do we know about Donald Trump? He loves to negotiate with people. What's the worst thing you can be in a negotiation? Desperate. We've seen how the US has treated Canada already. We should be, I think, quite concerned about how a transactional Donald Trump will treat any hint of desperation from Australia's elected leaders. And I think we should be worried about that.
Yeah. Well, putting AUKUS to one side, one thing that most countries have been focusing on is Trump's proposal for sweeping tariffs on imports into the United States.
I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. We are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury. The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before to restore.
Do you expect that will have a big impact on Australian politics when cost of living is already such a big thing for us here that, it might impact the people, Australian companies exporting to the United States?
Yeah, look, good question. I think it's really hard, as an economist, it's really hard to answer the question because we don't know exactly what form Trump's tariff policy is going to take. To be clear, I think he will introduce tariffs. The question is how big, on what, and on who. And, let's go back a step. The idea that free trade is universally accepted around the world and there is no alternative, so progressives should just get with the program, there is no alternative to free trade, well, that's over. That's done. That's cooked. Here's the world's largest economy saying, no, it's all about protectionism. So, at a conceptual level, Australian economists, Australian policymakers need to think really hard about what this means, because for us to sit around saying, well, he shouldn't do that, and because he shouldn't do that, we shouldn't do this. It's like, well, sorry, he's doing that, and if he's doing that, what should we do in response to that? So, all that stuff from the 90s and 2000s, the end of history, there is no alternative, global rules-based order, forget it. It was never really there in the way they talked about it, but there's not even the pretense of it now. Now, the good news is, a lot of Australia's exports aren't of the form that Trump is most likely to impose tariffs on. So, Australia doesn't have a big manufacturing industry anymore by historic standards or world standards. It's far bigger than people realise. 850,000 people work in manufacturing in Australia, which is, it's 4 times the size of the fossil fuel industry, 5 times the size. But, the US isn't a big export market for our manufactured goods, and Trump's whole Make America Great Again, I think will focus on manufacturing and to some extent agriculture, but most of our agricultural exports are not going to the US. So, great. Sorry to have a long, on the one hand, on the other economist answer, but
I think
no one knows what he's going to do.
Exactly. We don't know what we don't know, but, the ways that it could impact us. And people have also been talking about, that he'll be targeting China, and how that impacts China could also impact Australia because of our trade relationship there. But
look,
a bit hard to know at this point.
Oh, and that's true. Good point. So, to the extent that Trump imposes manufacturing targets on manufacturing tariffs, for example, on China, that'll have a big impact on China. But for example, if Chinese manufactured exports to the US decline, then either the US stops buying cars and fridges from China or they stop buying them altogether. I think they're far more likely to stop buying so many from China, which means that Vietnam and Bangladesh and other countries will make more. And guess what? We'll sell iron ore to them. So, again, we have to be careful. Will this disrupt the Chinese manufacturing economy? Yep, probably. To be clear, that's I think a bad thing for the global economy going about it the way Trump will. But I think that if it has a big impact on China, you'll see production of stuff move from China to other countries, which is, of course, Trump's plan. But those other countries don't have some of the raw materials that we export, so we'll just sell them to someone who's not China.
Yeah.
Wildfires are a fact of life here, but nothing prepared people for destruction on this scale.
November, December, now January. There's no fire season, it's fire year, it's year round.
I will end Kamala's war on American energy, and we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, baby, drill. And I'll terminate her Green New scam, one of the greatest scams in the history.
In recent weeks, we've seen the devastating winter wildfires unfold in California, and not only have they taken people's homes and their lives, but according to Australia Institute research, they'll actually add to the global climate change insurance crisis. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about what that analysis shows and why it matters for Australia?
Oh, absolutely. The fires in the US will push up the cost of insurance in Australia for a number of reasons. The first one is that just as we know that floods in Brisbane or floods in Lismore lead to more expensive insurance in Sydney and Melbourne, the same is true with floods or fires and storms around the world. And that's for two reasons. The first reason is that most of the insurance companies that we know about are either global in scale, so they're actually selling insurance across multiple countries, or they're involved in something called reinsurance, which is like a bookmaker laying off their bets. And imagine you were an insurance company who only had houses insured in Brisbane. Then in all the years that Brisbane doesn't have a flood, happy days, great to be an insurer. But the 1 year they do and you have to pay out, you're probably going to go broke. So insurance companies lay off their bets, they lay off their risk to other insurers. There's no doubt that Australian insurers are exposed directly and indirectly to the insurance payouts in the US. So that's one reason our insurance premiums will go up. The other reason is this is what climate change looks like. We are experiencing climate change. There are more floods and more fires and more storms of more severity than there used to be. And therefore, there are more payouts for fires and floods and storms than there used to be. And therefore, insurance is only going to get more expensive. So not only does the particular fire that we're talking about in LA mean our premiums will go up, but the underlying driver of the severity of that storm, climate change, is the same underlying driver that's going to cause more floods and fires elsewhere in the US, elsewhere in Europe, elsewhere in Africa, elsewhere in Asia. And again, we call it global warming for a reason. And what people and what politicians in Australia need to admit now is that all of that gas we export, all of that coal we export, that we've been telling ourselves, it doesn't count because we didn't burn it. Well, again, there's a hint in the name, global warming. We're the third largest fossil fuel exporter in the world, and wherever our gas is burned, wherever our coal is burned, it's heating up the one atmosphere we've got, and that one atmosphere is causing more and more storms and fires and floods. And whether it's burned on Australian soil or not is irrelevant. It's warming up the climate that we share, and it's driving up the cost of risk, the cost of insurance that we share.
So the cost of insurance is one of the key drivers that's making living standards fall in Australia, and living standards and the economy and the cost of things is probably the biggest issues in Australian politics right now. Overall, how is the economy tracking versus how people feel the economy is impacting them, I guess?
Well, don't ask Joe Biden that question. The US economy on paper was doing pretty well. Unemployment was relatively low. Wage growth had picked up. All sorts of kind of macroeconomic indicators were telling a positive story, but most people in the US felt that things weren't good, felt that things were getting worse, felt that things weren't as good as they used to be. And, guess what? Humans choose cars based on the one they feel like buying. They choose paint for their house based on the colour they feel like buying. And they choose political parties based on the ones they feel like voting for. All of that data that Joe Biden and the Democrats were throwing around wasn't terribly persuasive. It didn't change the way people feel. Here in Australia, yeah, something similar is going on. Unemployment's quite low, which is great. Avoiding recession is really good. The reason we're avoiding recession is because the Labor government has propped the economy up with public spending, which is good. We know it works. It's what the Liberals did during COVID. They knew it worked. The Reserve Bank, however, is pulling hard on the brake. Interest rates are still high. People, particularly young families with large mortgages, are really feeling the pain of those high interest rates. While, of course, wealthy retirees with large amounts of money in the bank, they're loving these high interest rates.
Mm.
You know, and this is the problem. We talk about the economy and how people feel about the economy as if it's this singular thing. Well, those high interest rates that are crushing young families are just, you know, a windfall. It's a cash splash for people with a lazy 2 to 5 million tucked away in their super. Labor's problem is that the rich people that are loving the high interest rates are probably less likely to vote Labor, and the young people that are hating those high interest rates are probably less likely to vote Labor because of the interest rates that the Reserve Bank so far has been determined to maintain. So, yeah, unemployment, low, inflation coming down, headline inflation in the target range already. You know, budget may well be in surplus again this year. On paper, you know, pretty good economic results for Labor, but that's, you know, I think if Albo walked around a shopping centre and told everyone to cheer up, it'd be pretty ugly television.
Yeah, it's not how people are experiencing the economy. I want to stick with the Reserve Bank for a second. They've come under a lot of fire for not meeting until late February to make a decision about interest rates. Do you think that criticism is valid?
Absolutely. We hear people talk all the time about fine-tuning the economy and, you know, exactly, you know, let's reduce the interest rate by 0.25%. Oh, do you think maybe it should be 0.15? Oh, I don't know. Are you a 0.25 or a 0.15 kind of economist? So all of this kind of talk about the precision of, you know, monetary policy and exactly when we should cut and whether it's by 0.25 or 0.15. And then, you know, we have a couple of months off over summer in the middle of a cost of living crisis because, you know, who wants to increase interest rates over summer? So, look, absolutely, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The next interest rate movement should be downwards. And the sooner they meet and the sooner they cut rates, the better it will be for the Australian economy, the better it will be for millions of Australians with mortgages, the better it will be for the millions of businesses who sell things or who want to sell things to the people with those mortgages.
Yeah, who want people to buy their things that they're selling.
Exactly. So, you know, we do need to cut rates and we do need to do it soon. And the idea that the RBA can have summer off, well, okay, let's own that. If you can have summer off, then can we stop pretending there's such incredible precision to the size and timing of interest rate cuts? I mean, pick a lane, people. This is a cost of living crisis and the interest rates need to be cut, and we should cut them when they need to be cut, not after a nice long scheduled summer holiday.
Yeah. Going to the politics of it though, obviously people are really still struggling. How do you think the government might respond in this election year to that cost of living pressure? Are we expecting more cash splashes or that more targeted approach that they've had in the past of trying to reduce the kind of the price of things that they have control of?
Yeah, I think the government's done a pretty good job of targeting a lot of their assistance to people who need it most and also to the things that were getting the most expensive and in turn putting pressure on the consumer price index. So I think it's good politics and good economics. You know, my only criticism is I don't think they've gone far enough. And by far enough, I mean, I don't think that they've done as much as they could to help in the cost of living crisis. And I think politically, most people would probably welcome that they're being ambitious and trying to get things done. Sorry to keep bringing it back to Trump, but let's be clear. People were more afraid of the status quo in the US than they were afraid of Donald Trump. People who wanted change voted for Donald Trump, not because they knew exactly what they were going to get, but because they were scared they were going to get more of what they were already having, more of the same. So, I just think that we in Australia, as I said at the beginning, need to realise that change is possible. Who we vote for really matters. And, if Labor were to go to this election saying, look, let's stop mucking around, let's just make childcare free, because that'll be a great way to lower the cost of living. Childcare is a major expense for young families, the same group that we can't do much about for interest rates because of the Reserve Bank's obstinance. So we can't do much about interest rates, but hey, people suffering the most from interest rates, we can not only reduce your cost of living, but at the same time, and this is really important, we can make it a lot cheaper for parents, particularly women in Australia, to choose to return to work quicker or full-time instead of part-time, because we've removed the significant expense of the childcare. So I would argue good politics and good policy all at the same time. So, I think there's plenty that the government can do. My suspicion is they'll do a little bit on childcare, which will be better than nothing, but isn't that the problem? That people are sick of barracking for better than nothing. That's what Trump comes along and says, vote for me, I'll drain the swamp and change things up.
I'll blow it all up.
Exactly. And you got sensible, centrist parties saying, oh, steady as she goes, but just to be clear, there's plenty of money for submarines. There's plenty of money for the stage 3 tax cuts. There's plenty of money, for the inland rail and the crazy stuff the coalition wanted to build when they were in power. It's just we have to, cool our jets when it comes to crazy stuff like childcare or dental care or these other things that, to be clear, most Northern European countries give to their citizens for free. Now, of course, it's not free. Yep, it's paid through taxes, but that's right. Imagine if those with the highest capacity to pay, imagine if the fossil fuel industry or the banks or others paid more tax and we had, cheaper childcare or cheaper dental care. I don't know about you, Ed, but I could live with that trade-off.
Yes, certainly.
We have not only conducted ourselves in a responsible way in terms of our loyalty to each other and our policy offerings, we have also, in doing that, put pressure on a bad government.
As a new poll shows the coalition ahead 51-49 and Mr Dutton level with Anthony Albanese's preferred Prime Minister.
We haven't let this government up off the mat for 1 minute over the course of the last 2.5 years. And we should be incredibly proud of that.
I do want to ask about that, though, because I think it's a good point that you've made about people just not wanting more of the status quo. Peter Dutton is obviously feeling much more positive about his chances. That the Saturday paper reported that he's ditching any two-term strategy in opposition. I guess, could you reflect a little bit on his approach to opposition so far? And then next I want to get into a bit of election discussion, not necessarily predictions, but where we think this is all headed. But first of all, think people are doing it tough. How do you think Peter Dutton's approach to opposition so far is working for him?
Oh, Peter Dutton's been a very successful opposition leader for the simple reason that he's still opposition leader. And I mean that. It's actually hard to stay opposition leader after, for a full term. It's usually the first opposition leader after an electoral loss. So when Scott Morrison lost in 2022, the first opposition leader is a bit of a night watchman, to use the cricket analogy, while everyone figures out who they really want to put up to win votes at the next election. Dutton knew that, and Dutton spent his whole term as opposition leader staying opposition leader, because Dutton knows that Peter Dutton can't be Prime Minister if he doesn't stay opposition leader. So I'm not diminishing his achievement there. It's quite a significant one. He's convinced his party for 3 years, don't dump me for someone more electable. I'm as good as it gets. Brackets, the party will go crazy. The left and right of the Liberal Party will fight each other if anyone but me is opposition leader. So he's been very clever at staying opposition leader. I would argue his whole approach to nuclear has got nothing to do with climate change. And, happy to bet a bottle of wine with anyone who wants. We'll never build a nuclear power station in Australia. He knows that. I know that. The whole point of talking about nuclear power was to stop a war between the inner city Liberals and the National Party. The whole point of talking about nuclear was rather than have Barnaby Joyce fighting against Paul Fletcher on, what their renewables policy should be or what their climate target should be, Dutton just said, hey, let's just go up a level, pretend we believe in climate change and say nuclear will fix it. You watch, the lefties will go nuts and they'll all attack us for supporting nuclear, and we can all just sit around saying, well, I just think it should be on the table. Right? And it's worked. It's worked an absolute treat. And that's now what Peter Dutton's doing with youth crime, or whatever. He's just actually trying to make sure that the media, and this is, I think, an important distinction, that the media just talk about the things he wants to talk about so that he's not under pressure to talk about the things that he and his party don't know how to talk about. I think the challenge for him is that very few people are consuming that media, and controlling the narrative at the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian is different from getting a message out that is going to swing a lot of voters his way.
So just to wrap up, I guess, you've said that you think minority government is the most likely outcome for this election. Is there anything that's happened over the break that makes you change your mind as we head into campaign season?
No, look, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how the Prime Minister is going to behave in the next 3 months or what world events could happen. But, if an election were held tomorrow, I think it's far more likely that that Labor would be in a minority government. That is, Labor would have enough seats to form a minority government than the coalition under Peter Dutton. Now, why do I think that? Because when you count the seats, the individual seats that the Liberals need to win, I just think there's far too many for them to win at the moment based on the polling that I've seen. And, of course, the Liberals are likely to lose some seats. Everyone's talking about the seats they could win, but the Liberals are likely to lose the seat of Bradfield, for example. Now, if they lose the seat of Bradfield, where Paul Fletcher recently resigned, they need to win 2 seats somewhere else to make any advance. The seat of Wannon, there's a good chance the Liberals might lose that regional Victorian seat. So, I think the Liberal Party will pick up seats at this election, but I also think they'll lose some, and the net gain they need of around 19 seats, less if they can form, their own minority government. I just think it's a big ask. But of course, no one's saying, oh, Dutton shouldn't go into minority government. That'd be chaos. Chaos, I tell you. Minority government's bad. We should never have one, except if the Libs are running one, in which case it's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, watch this space. Labor forming minority government, terrible for democracy. Liberals, it's actually the only sensible show in town.
Well, we'll see if that's how it plays out. But thanks very much for your time today, Richard.
Thanks, Eb.
If you want to join us at our Climate Integrity Summit in Canberra on Wednesday, the 12th of February, you can get your tickets via our website at australiainstitute.org.au or tap on the link in the show notes. We would love to hear your thoughts on the show today, and you can reach out to us via email at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au or find us on social media. We're at australiainstitute.org.au on Blue Sky and at the Oz Institute with an AUS on Instagram and Twitter. Our theme music is by Jonathan McPeak from Pulse and Thrum with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Thanks for listening.